Okay, and we're back. Last we left our heroes, we were talking a little bit about the shader and how we done this cool shader stuff. There's a couple things I wanted to show, and first was the shader itself. We talked about we assign the shader here, right? And in our shader, we have it's a little hard to see from this, but inside of our shader, let's go ahead and make this full type screen now. There's a couple things I wanted to do. Um, I get, I hate to say bad practices, right? But technically, we don't really need these guys because they're kind of at the defaults, and it just makes it a little simpler. So I'm going to delete them. I wouldn't suggest it overall. I feel like that's cheating a little bit. Okay, so the question next was, what was the deal with our emission? And it's actually we had connected the emission intensity, as you remember, we had to dig around for it, but we added that edge thing to it. By default, however, if you come over to, sorry, if you look in the surface model, by default over here on emission, see that? By default, it's not emission is not enabled, so we have to actually enable that to actually see it. Okay, the other thing I wanted to point out, and this is going to be a weird kind of bug in Houdini, but let's turn the checkerboard off for a second. Let's turn the object on. Sometimes this guy does not show up as shadered. In other words, if you have that on, it looks like that, which is a little weird. And sometimes I've had it where it turns totally white. And if I do that, notice I turn it back on and off, then it looks strange again. And then when you have lights on, none of those things are supposed to happen. The fix seems to basically be to turn off this texturing, and then it does show the underlying shader. If that doesn't work, hit that a couple times. You notice the opposite problem with checkerboard. The checkerboard's supposed to be checkerboarded there, but it doesn't. But if we turn it back on and off, geez, no, it isn't even doing that. Doink. Well, it's supposed to. Anyway, it renders well. But let me demonstrate that for a second. First, I'm going to switch a couple things. Let's change the checkerboard to be in the ZX plane. Oh, hey, now we have that. See, it's a bug in the display of Houdini, and the version you're using of Houdini might not have this bug by then. Let's switch this to that, and just 40/40 and leave it at 0. And out here on its transform in the real world, in the outside world, I'm going to put it at like 0.4 and -4 to move it down there. So that'll be our checkerboard. And then I'm going to bring our guy on, and I'm going to turn that off. And again, he disappeared. It's a little weird. There's definitely some bug stuff going on. But right now, we don't care about that. What I wanted to show was that if we look through our camera, I'll even make this a wee bit bigger. Now let's go to our render view that we like so much. And, whoops, you're not supposed to see that. That's secret. Don't look. That's our final image. But I'm going to do a render of just the ball itself without, you notice, because I don't have it merged in with the particles. And voila, that's what I really wanted to show. That see how this guy is now emitting. As you saw from the frame before, it's going to mix in with the particles coming off, and everything will be really cool. So that's the main thing I wanted to show. Now another thing I wanted to tell you guys about. As I was tootling around with this, let's go back to here. A couple things I wanted to change. I look at that and I'm like, oh, that does look cool. But there was a couple things after doing a render of it I liked a little bit better. One of them is upping the particle count, doubling it to about that. But the other thing is something you might remember we screwed around with a little bit back when. Let's just make this full screen so it doesn't force the update on us. Inside of here, inside of our noise, I can't spell noise via VOP, because there are two different noise ways of doing it. We decided to go that route, taking this guy, putting him into the force. I'm going to switch it up and say taking that guy and putting him into the volume and actually adding it the way we did before, or considered anyway. And on top of that, the cutting down this amplitude to about 1. And the reason I'm doing all that stuff is I actually pre-rendered a couple of these, so I'm going to show you. The version we had before, And this is again, ignore the fact that this guy's black and it's just a play blast. Just look at the movement of the particles for a second. That's what we had, this kind of slow thing, which I think I thought would be good because it's, disintegration-y. But after looking at it, it just didn't seem as exciting. So this version we have now, when you do it, it's going to look like this, where it gets kind of going off and a little bit crazier. I don't know. I just kind of think that looks a little bit cooler. And again, this is a play blast, so don't get confused that this is black and not see-through. Don't worry about that. It's just an OGL play blast. I just feel like it shows some more of the stuff. We're going to use that more when we throw it. And when we use that same noise when we do our gesture with my hands again, going around the curve and everything. And it's just a little more exciting, so I'm putting that in. Feel free to ignore that if you don't want to do it, but I think it's a lot of fun. Okay, so another thing we can do that tends to help just for looks here is when we are having our particles, let's go to like there. If you hit D on this guy and you have your visualizers and all this stuff, taking this point size, I think we had it at 3 before, and taking it down to 1 sometimes just helps, especially when we have loads of particles. I've already rebaked these, by the way, with those new settings, so that's why it looks like that. So if you're following along at home, they just made those changes, go ahead and press that button and wait for, only took about a minute or so to get particles. So then we get our nifty kind of particles going off, and we can see how they connect up with our disintegration. Okay? Now that's basically the end of the disintegration part of this tutorial, and at this point you've kind of given away the main gag of what we're going to do, which is we're moving particles, we're making particles, generating them, and making a shader that uses the same math to kind of generate them. So these next two things are going to do with the teleporting and the transmogrification, or whatever word we use that for that, and even the water render, some of these other things. That's all kind of icing on the cake. You guys have just had the final meal, the exciting part. So as far as big magic that I was going to show you, it won't get any massive different from that. So now we're really just kind of doing what this would be like. The R&D phase is over, and now we're actually working in the shot if we're in movies. That's what this would be called. So let's go ahead and, oh man, I wouldn't do this because I want to show you the next thing. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put down a curve. And I should really put that next lesson. Sorry, I get too excited. Okay, so I'm going to call this the end of our disintegration, and now you've seen the big trick behind this thing. And now we're going to kind of see how to integrate that to have an object, a separate object that we'll call object B. Now I'll go ahead and do a little bit here. We're going to make another object, and it's going to be called object B. And what it's going to be is, some other thing. We could have it be a square if we were boring. But instead, I think we're going to do the classic. You guys have all seen this before. We're going to go from a sphere to a teapot because everybody loves teapots. Okay, so we're done with done with disintegration. Now we're going to take the same trick in teleportation. Not a whole lot of massive magic. What this is going to be more bread and butter of effects work. In other words, we're going to make a line. We're going to have particles streaming along that line. We're going to change how their noise affects on the suction along the line. We're going to change the animation so that it matches up. I had this A animation, which I said was kind of different. Well, the B animation that goes has an offset. We have 160 out of 40. Then we'll start from 80, go to 240, and so forth. So it's kind of the bread and butter. It's time to get the work done, the R&D, and we're ready to start cruising. So come back for lesson 11.